Hi. So for everyone just joining in, thank you for joining saving our webinar, Saving America's Chinatowns, Philadelphia. We are the first Chinese American museum and the first and only in our nation's capital dedicated to the Chinese American story. My name is Ellen Fung, and I'm one of the museum's associates that helped develop this program. In today's webinar, we're going to delve into some of the troubles currently facing Philadelphia's Chinatown, as well as some of the more historical threats that have loomed over this space and other Chinatowns across the country. As someone from the Philly suburbs who spent time in Chinatown looking for a connection to my culture, this space is very important to me and I wanted to highlight these issues. However, I will let the panelists get into more about why Philadelphia's Chinatown, and frankly, all Chinatowns are more important. Our moderator this evening will be Yilin Zhang. Yilin is a communication strategist and healthcare professional, as well as a former political candidate in DC. She also works with nonprofits, leading community outreach and engagement activities. She holds a degree from the London School of Economics and Political Science and University of Mission Ann Arbor, and also was a Fulbright Scholar. Next, we have Kaya Chow, a junior at Bryn Mawr College, and Taran Flattery, a sophomore at the University of Pennsylvania. They're both founders of the Students for Preservation of Chinatown, otherwise known as SPOC. SPOC is a coalition of college students in the Philadelphia area dedicated to fighting against the proposed construction of the new 76ers arena less than a block away from Chinatown. We also have Lisa Mao, who is the director, writer, and co-producer of A Tale of Three Chinatowns, a film that explores the survival of Chinatowns across America using Washington, D.C., Chicago, and Boston as focal points. The film was nominated for several awards in 2021 and won an award for the Toronto International Women Film Festival that year. And lastly, I would like to introduce Deborah Wei. Debbie helped found the Asian Americans United in 1985 to organize low-income and working-class Asian Americans. Some of its victories include winning reform in the school district of Philadelphia for immigrant students and families, improving language access across the city, and much more. Currently, she works as a social studies curriculum specialist for the school district of Philadelphia, and in her free time, works to try and stop billionaire predatory developers from building an arena and destroying her community. Thanks for tuning in again, and Yulin, whenever you're ready.
Thank you so much, Ellen, for the introductions, and welcome to everyone that's tuning in. I see a lot of familiar names and a lot of new names, but I want to thank you for taking the time to be a part of this important discussion today. So we do have a Q&A, and please prepare your questions. If you'd like to introduce yourself or have a question, just simply put it in the Q&A box, and I will refer to audience questions toward the end of this webinar. But first, I'd like to get started with some more in-depth conversation with all of our panelists about their background and the work that they are currently doing. So today, really, the theme is we are talking about the current state and the future state of Chinatowns across the US, and we are shedding light specifically on the Philadelphia Chinatown. And as Ellen introduced, we have Ms. Deborah Wei, who I would like to invite to talk a little bit about her work first and the work that she is doing. And I know, Debbie, you started the Asian Americans United back in 1985 and have since done numerous projects. And so I'd like you to talk a little bit about your tremendous background working in the community and also the current issue that you are tackling in the Philadelphia Chinatown. So Debbie, please go ahead.
Sure. I'm kind of just going to say I was born in the U.S. My parents came to the United States in 1948. I was probably 30 years old when I discovered that when they came, they were undocumented. But that's a common story for a lot of Chinese Americans of my age, undocumented or living under somebody else's name. I remember growing up, going to Chinatown every weekend, and it was literally like where my parents went to get sustained, like sustenance, not just the food that they needed, but the identity affirmation they needed, and just being able to put their shoulders down for a little bit. I went to college, then I took an urban semester in Hong Kong. While I was in college, it was actually when I first started working as a community organizer. I was organizing tenants in all Black African-American community in North Philadelphia, but also doing work in Chinatown in the late 70s. what happened with, well, so I founded AAU in 1985. When I came back from Hong Kong, there had been an explosion of Southeast Asian refugee resettlement in Philadelphia, and folks were like placed in really pretty horrible conditions, and there was tremendous anti-Asian violence. And so we felt that this required a organizational response, and we felt that there needed to be an Asian American organization in Philly that was progressive and that would not be afraid to speak out. And that was AAU's founding. Our initial work had always been in the Southeast Asian community as well as Chinatown. AAU went on to do a number of things. I was one of the founders as well of the Mid-Autumn Festival in Chinatown, which is now in its, I think, 27th or 28th year. It's the biggest street festival in Chinatown. We also founded a charter school, the Folk Arts Cultural Treasures Charter School, and I was the first principal of that school. And again, because our Chinatown lacks, like many Chinatowns, lacks any kind of government invested infrastructure. No public school, no playground, no library, no health center, no, like anything you can think of that communities should have in an urban setting, we've had to build on our own. In terms of Chinatown itself, like a lot of incursions on Chinatown territory. Probably the first was way back in the 30s when they built this extension of the subway, and that took a big swath of land in very early part of Chinatown. In the 1970s, this is very familiar to all Chinatowns. We had a highway that was built and bisected the community. In the 1980s and the 1990s, there was a commuter rail tunnel that was dug up, and an entire block was removed from Chinatown, so it would make it easier for commuters from the suburbs to get into the city. We also had the convention center. So the highway was on our north side, the tunnel is on our east side, the convention center is on the west side. We had 200 people lose their homes to that. They took the entire west side of 11th Street on backward. We also did not directly affect Chinatown in terms of taking land, but did affect Chinatown in terms of the size of the project, which is the Gallery Mall, which is a 3-block mall built in the 80s to kind of mirror suburban malls, I guess. And that's the site of our current struggles. Moving forward, we took those 3 big developments. There wasn't really a lot of vocal opposition at the time. People felt, I think, some folks in Chinatown felt like, well, we have to bargain for stuff. Like, so we'll get a Chinatown gate if we take the convention center, or we'll get some low-income housing if we take this tunnel. So it was always this kind of, in order for us to get the basic things that we should have, we had to give away parts of the community. Chinatown now is probably 25 to 40% smaller than it should be. 1993, they proposed a prison, and that was a very large federal prison right next to the Catholic school in Chinatown. We were able to fight that one off. It was our first win of opposing. In 2000, they tried to build a baseball stadium in Chinatown, and that picture behind me is actually me in 2000. I think it's important to note that we won that fight. We fought off that baseball stadium, and in the footprint of that baseball stadium, we have built the charter school that I mentioned before, serving 500 plus children. We built the Asian Arts Initiative, the Hoyu Arts and Cultural Center, the Chinese Christian Church built an annex there, Philadelphia Chinatown Development Corporation just opened a large community center apartment complex called the Crane. So like we know how to develop our community. We just do it on a human scale, and we do it for our people, not over our people. We fought off that in 2000. We fought off casinos in 2008 and 2013. In 2022, they made the pronouncement. It was not an announcement. It was a pronouncement that they were building an arena in that mall that I had mentioned. And the back wall of the arena, literally, if you know anything about Philly, it's all like row houses and stuff. So the back wall of the arena literally abuts the first business in Chinatown. So it's like the row home to Chinatown, which of course, we're not going to be able to survive 6 years of construction. Our businesses, as in all Chinatown businesses across the country, suffered greatly during COVID. A lot of our businesses didn't make it. We're just coming out of that period and just like sort of trying to rebuild. And this has our businesses and our community and our residents know, like, the cumulative impact of all these projects. This would be the nail in the coffin. We will not survive this. This fight's a little bit different, and I think it's reflective of development across this country. We are not the only, first of all, we are not the only communities that have ever been displaced, right? We work very closely with Black and Brown communities as well that have faced displacement over the years. We are also not the only community that is falling victim to predatory development. It's happening across the country. And what is different this time is that housing is now being traded on the stock market as a commodity. This is a new formation since 2008, when the stock market crashed and these equity firms started buying up housing, and now they're trading it on Wall Street. So the 3 billionaires who are funding this arena are equity. They have equity funds that do housing development and take over swaths of communities. So we're quite sure that they are coming for us, that they view Chinatown as undervalued because, and I think this is true of all Chinatowns. When we started, it was an area that nobody wanted to live in, and suddenly Center City came to us, and so now it's valuable land. And that's kind of the history of our fight in a nutshell.
Thank you for that, Debbie. And it's clear that from this timeline that you've listed, this is a trend of developments that could have taken place in Chinatown, and really you and others in the community have organized successfully. So I'd like to now turn to Kaya and Taran. In your efforts, you two founded the Students for the Preservation of Chinatown, and you two are both students right now. So I'd really like you to talk about your backgrounds, and on top of that, what is the current state of this fight that Debbie outlined with the proposed or the announced Sixers arena. So why don't I have Taran start first?
Hi, everyone. My name is Taran Flaherty. So I'm currently a junior at Penn, the University of Pennsylvania, studying history. Grew up in Philly my entire life. Both Kaya and I have very similar stories. We are long time childhood friends. Our parents organized together. Our moms are very close friends. And so we both attended Folk Arts Cultures Treasures Charter School in Chinatown that Debbie mentioned earlier, that AAU and her founded. And that's kind of where we grew up. FACS is a very unique school in the way that their mission is kind of to like transform how we think about education by preserving culture and like teaching young students to value not only their own heritage and have pride in your heritage, but also to be able to respectfully learn and appreciate others. And so I think some of the key like principles that FACS taught Kaya and I growing up have stuck with us basically our entire lives. And so at FACS, we learn about our teachers, our principals, obviously our staff members, our classmates. And so we were growing up in this community that was like very involved in Chinatown. And so kind of both of us, I guess our background is that we were alive during the 2008 casino fight. And so where 2008, they proposed to build a casino in Chinatown. Both our moms were very, very involved. Our fathers also involved, maybe just not on the front lines as our mothers were. But it's something I just use the word moving because I don't know how else to describe it, but it's very moving to be able to see like your teachers, your classmates' parents, the people who serve you food at restaurants, all in the streets together fighting against one thing. And so when you have like your home life, your social life, your educational life all coming together to like teach you how to love and preserve your community, that's where we learned a lot of our lessons. And so fast forward to today or I guess a year ago in July 2022, when the proposed 76ers arena plan came out, both Kai and I were just originally invited by our parents to come and see how older organizers organize against large development. And it was just a learning experience at first. But then we started researching, just adding in bits and pieces in the coalition and learning that actually our institutions were very tied to the developers of the arena, and then decided to form Students for the Preservation of Chinatown because we wanted to facilitate a way for college students who were either knowingly or unknowingly tied to all of these developers. And so also we're obviously taking from a long tradition of like student activists being part of Chinatown's fights. If we look at like the fight against the Vine Street Expressway, a lot of students were involved. Maybe not so much in the casino fights or the stadium fights, but definitely in the Vine Street Expressway fights. There were a lot of students. There were student newspapers. There was a lot of young people who were fighting for their community, fighting for this community. And so every day, Kai and I just really tried to take from those lessons and those roots of youth organizing, knowing our place, but also doing our best to aid this fight. And so I'll pass to Kaya.
Yeah, my name's Kaya. I'm a senior at Bryn Mawr College currently. Yeah, I think Taran and Debbie kind of covered it all. I don't really have much else to add. But yeah, I'm co-leader of SPOC, and also just want to emphasize how generational this fight is. Debbie, who is on this panel, is my mother. So and we can all see where I get this from and how I learned organizing skills and things like that. And I can definitely talk more about that if people are interested. But yeah, not much else to add.
No, I think it's incredible the work that the two of you are doing. And as a matter of fact, in my research, I read an interview that the two of you did with Teen Bogue. And I'm not sure whose mother it was that said this, but it was very insightful, but also sad to hear that one of your mothers said, "I'm in this fight, and I know that my children will continue this fight." So really what we hope to do is just build community and end the need for this fight. But the two of you have stood up an incredible organization. And I thought it was also interesting in that interview that you said when you were starting to do your research that some of the developers that are part of the Sixers arena, they sit on boards for your schools. Is that right?
Yeah, so I guess I can elaborate a little bit on that. So we actually, after doing a bit of research, found out that David Edelman, who is the main sort of developer behind the arena, is also the CEO of Campus Apartments, and Campus Apartments is the main company in Philly who provides off-campus student housing to Penn students. So David Edelman is one developer. The second developer is David Blitzer. He is on the the head of tactical opportunities with the Blackstone Group. If you don't know what the Blackstone Group is, they're sort of the world's biggest landlords, and have been called out by the UN several times for violating human rights. And he proudly sits on their board, and they actually just recently acquired, I think it's called American Campus, and they also own a majority of Drexel's off-campus housing. David Edelman is also on the board of Penn Medicine. David Blitzer is on the board of trustees at Penn and at Penn's business school, Wharton. And then the third developer is Josh Harris. Josh Harris is the founder of Apollo Global Group, who aided in bankrupting one of the only hospitals in Philly that was available to low income patients who didn't have insurance. It was called Hahnemann Hospital. So yeah, all three of these billionaire developers make money off of exploiting people and have very long histories of such. And also an important thing to note is that the fight for housing and the fight to preserve low income communities of color is really relevant to University City, because David Blitzer and David Edelman's company specifically, through acquiring student housing in University City, has effectively contributed to the long-standing gentrification and displacement of low-income Black people who used to live in this neighborhood. The University City used to be called a neighborhood called the Black Bottom, which was a low-income Black neighborhood until Penn and Drexel started gentrifying it and displacing people. So this is not just a fight for Chinatown, but also a fight for communities of color all over the city. And we've also worked very closely with the fight to save the UC Townhomes. In short, the UC Townhomes were a low-income housing complex in which majority Black low-income residents lived in this complex for a very long time. And the landlord, with I think about like 6 months notice, tried to kick them out and evict them because he wanted to sell the building. And so this was a very more than a year long fight to try to preserve this housing. And they actually just reached a settlement recently, but just goes to show like this very long history of displacing Black people in this neighborhood, and how, these developers sort of make their money off of exploiting low income people of color. And also a good example of how, allyship across communities can be really powerful.
Absolutely. And so we're seeing this trend not just across time, but also across the US within Chinatowns and beyond. And I know that some of our viewers today, they're calling in from all across the country, some representing Chinatowns and other parts of the country. And I want to make note of some, for example, Red Bluff Chew, that's working in Northern California, preserving Chinatowns in Northern California. And also several months ago, 1882 Foundation, working with the Harrison Institute for Public Law. The Harrison Institute did an interview with stakeholders across the country and looked at what are the gaps and what is the current state and where can we go in the future. So that's a good segue to, last but not least, Lisa Mao, who is a veteran director, writer, and producer who made an incredible documentary called A Tale of Three Chinatowns that focused on the Chinatowns in DC, Chicago, and Boston. So I'd like to invite Lisa to talk about your work on the creative side, but also what inspired you to do this. And I know your work has taken you across the country. So can you share a little bit about that?
Yeah. Hi, Elaine. Thank you. Thanks for having me. Yeah. So I and my production partner, Penny Lee, we produced a film called A Tale of Three Chinatowns. It was finished in 2021, and it focuses on the current state of three Chinatowns in the United States. As you mentioned, Washington, D.C., Boston, and Chicago. We focused on those three cities because we originally started looking at DC. Like DC's Chinatown is a shell of itself. And the question was how, why? How did it become like this? Was it the riots of 1968, which Penny and I had done a film on a few years prior, and that was really the seed that led to the second film. Once we started looking into the gentrification of DC's Chinatown and how long it had actually been in the works, that led us to Boston's Chinatown and other Chinatowns across the country. Obviously, we could have looked at San Francisco, we could have looked at Philly, New York, all of them. But we didn't have enough time. So Boston was it, because they have institutional, commercial development happening. And there's also the state of Massachusetts that they too are developers. As Debbie said, what happened to Philly all those years ago with the highway, that you could have just said, replace Philly with Boston. And then there you go. So in our film, we talk about Boston's Chinatown. The Chinatown community had just raised all this money to build a community building. Okay, this is post World War II. And right after they finished it, the state was going to come in and they wanted to level it for a highway. I mean, talk about just gross negligence and all that. Luckily, the community was able to, it was the first time they really organized and were active, and they were able to prevent the demolition of the whole building. They were able to get half of it. Okay, so half of the building was taken down for this public project. So, all that Debbie rolled off at the beginning, at the start of this panel, again, it's like this has happened in so many places. We talk about DC and the arrival of the Verizon Center. We talk about even Washington, DC, going back over 100 years, them having to move because the federal government wanted to create the Federal Triangle buildings. And so basically had to move out the original Chinatown location, which was along Pennsylvania Avenue. So the film, it felt like there was a deep history of displacement, and obviously none of these cities are the same. They have different forces, different governments, different characters that are in in these different cities. And so the Chinatowns have been shaped in different ways depending on history, events that are planned and not planned, and also the aftermath. So we looked at those three to see, why is DC like it is now? Boston is fighting for its life. And then Chicago's was early on a bright light, because this Chinatown had grown over the last 100 years. It was the only one that we found in the United States that had been growing. And when I say growing, I mean in the traditional sense where it's a downtown community, it's in the city, and it's a community. It's not just the businesses and the restaurants, it's the residents who live there, right? It's a community. There's a library, there's a school, and people live there. Okay, so that's what we were looking at. And Chicago's Chinatown has been growing, and to see the activism that's gone on there over the last several decades. Gene Lee, who was one of our main interview subjects, who had been involved in the mayor's office years ago, most of his career. Gene talks about the lessons learned from 1912, which is when Chicago's original Chinatown, which had been down by the river in a plum spot, what became a plum spot, they were displaced in 1912. They had to move. And they chose their current location partially because that was one of the few places where they could actually put down roots. Because rewind the clock, back then, there were restrictive covenants. You couldn't just, I want to buy this land. Okay, here you go. No, you couldn't do that. As a Asian American or person of color, because this happened to other communities as well, you could not buy land or put down roots wherever you wanted to. So Chicago laid down roots in this one area. And, you know, as Debbie's talked about the city center coming, that's kind of happened to Chicago now too. So Chicago itself currently, even though it's been growing for the last 100 years, it too faces a modern day, I don't want to say threat, but yes, a modern day threat with a gigantic development called, it's like the 78 project, which is this huge area of land right next to Chinatown that is actually being developed right now. So it's all relevant. And, you know, for me and Penny, we wanted to do this story because it felt so needed. And it also felt like it transcended multiple communities, not just the Chinese American community, but whether it's, you know, the other you know, like Vietnamese community, the Latinx community, the Black community, the working community. It could simply even be the working, you know, the working population, right? The working class population, middle class, that might be forced out. So we wanted to tell these stories of what is happening right now.
Thank you, Lisa. And I also want to thank the audience for sending in questions. So I want to jump in here with an audience question since it's relevant for this conversation now. And I'm going to ask Debbie to answer this first. So I think specifically in this fight right now, on the Sixers arena, this question is related to how much communication and collaboration takes place between community groups trying to protect Chinatown legacies in cities across the USA. So maybe in this fight or others, how much coalition work takes place across the US?
You know, I'm laughing because I was listening to what Lisa said. Penny actually, when this was first announced, we arranged a trip to DC Chinatown. We wanted to see what the arena did to DC Chinatown. And it was Penny that I contacted. And so we went, she arranged for us to have a tour. She had brought together some of the former residents, really a shell of the Chinatown I remember visiting when I was younger. You know, replaced by big box condo buildings with, you know, whether or not they're filled or not, doesn't matter to these equity developers. And like 300 residents left, and they're stuck because they're low-income residents in a low-income housing project, so they can't move because they don't have money to move anywhere else. And the folks were telling us that it's a lot of elderly and that they actually have to drive them 26 miles to get Asian groceries now, into the suburbs. So seeing Fuddruckers with Chinese signs and Hooters with Chinese signs, because one of the agreements was they would keep the character of the community. So they put Chinese on everything. And they couldn't even stay in business. They shut down. And it was striking how like this very vibrant human scale community had been destroyed by this development. And when we got on the van to come back, Penny stopped me and she said, like, I have some advice for you. Take a lot of pictures, because if they build this arena, that's all you're going to have left. They went on to write an op-ed to our newspaper for us. It was the first time in the history of Philadelphia that the paper of record published an op-ed in both English and Chinese, warning Philadelphia to not allow this to happen. Boston Chinatown, good friend Andrew Leung had been involved with a lot of those fights in the past, and our zoning attorney, our attorney is coming from Asian American Legal Defense and Education Fund in New York, but is Andrew's niece who lives in Boston. So there's a little bit of like, I'm laughing because there is so much communication across Chinatowns. Most recently, I went to a conference that was sponsored by the US Consulate in Vancouver, Chinatown, where 18 Chinatowns got together to really talk about all the stuff that we were facing. And our stories were all the same. Our stories were so similar. Like some of the players or the developments happening might be slightly different, but the players are the same. So in terms of that, I think we've been communicating with other Chinatowns and you know, calling each other for advice. I have a call next week with Lydia Lowe in Boston to talk about the advantages and disadvantages of being designated a historical district. So there's just a lot of cross support and learning going on. I think for Philadelphia in particular, where Asian Americans do not have a strong political voice, though Taran's mom was the most popular member of city council and had left to run for mayor and unfortunately did not win. But despite Helen, we don't have a whole lot of political voice. I think Asian Americans United, since its founding, always felt it was critical, not just strategically, but morally, to stay grounded in supporting all communities across Philadelphia facing the issues that we were facing. So what that allowed us to do was build very strong coalitions. And so we do have a lot of support in the Black and Brown community, well, particularly the Black community, in terms of just showing up and being there for us. And when they have actions, we show up and we're there for them. And an organization called Power, which is interfaith, and the clergy involved with that, like we're really fortunate to be able to draw on those past relationships, but also to stand together, because emotionally this stuff is draining. Fighting these things, seeing your home being destroyed, the gentrification is violence. It's taking roots and tearing them out of the ground and then scattering them. And when you do that to plants, when you uproot them, they have root shock, which is the title of a book about gentrification. And when you throw them down somewhere else, they may or may not survive. You throw them down without their neighbors, without their relatives, without the infrastructure that sustain them. The children don't know the school they're going to. Their grandparents are now living, you know, on opposite sides of the city from their children and grandchildren when we used to have a community. Those kinds of things are a kind of emotional, psychological violence that our communities are facing, and just standing together in times like this is really critical. We've had a lot of great cross-city support. There's actually at least 4 spin-off organizations fighting this arena. SPOC is one. One is called NACIS, No Arena Chinatown Solidarity. It was started actually by a bunch of Jewish folks who wanted to be allies. But it is now blown up into this huge multiracial, multi-denominational organization. RICE, which is the restaurant industry for Chinatown's existence, it's since expanded to restaurant industry and small businesses. And they include businesses that are not in Chinatown. They're South Philly Barbacoa, whose chef is it's a Mexican place. The chef won a James Beard Award, you know, one of our founding RICE members. So seeing small businesses across the city jump in and say, you cannot destroy the small businesses of Chinatown. And then Pecan, Philadelphia Coalition of Neighborhoods, are neighborhoods across the district that our city council person comes from, who also are saying, this is a stupid idea and Chinatown shouldn't fight this alone. So they are organizing. And so we have Wards 1, Ward 2, Ward 39A, we have the Franklin Bridge Neighbor Association. You know, like it's just this incredible coalition of all different groups coming together to, and I think why it resonates is that development is destroying all of our cities and in all different places. And it's resonating across all communities. And in Philadelphia, this arena is so audacious and so big and so designed to totally destroy a community at once that somehow it's resonating and people are starting to come together to help us in this fight.
That's great. So what we're hearing is that the coalition is not just within Chinatowns, but really beyond. And it's so important to have allyship. So some other questions that I'm seeing from the audience. This one is for Taran and Kaya. We were talking about the universities that you're with. So one individual is asking, is there an official position about the Sixers Arena proposal, say from Penn University?
I can answer that. Penn does not have a official position. They really don't want to touch the issue and I think it's very clear that they're able to do that very well. A lot of people are not going to think of a university like 3 miles away from Chinatown as being contributing in any major way. But if you just look a little underneath the surface, not only does all these developers decide, sit on Penn's boards, contribute millions of dollars to them as alumni, two of them are alumni, but just Penn itself has a lot of influence in the city. It is one of the largest employers in the city of Philadelphia. It's one of the largest property owners. Penn has a enormous amount of sway in the city, but they choose to stay silent. And so something that Spock is constantly working on is Penn professors in general at different universities, because if we can't make our administration say something, even though we're constantly in conversation with them, something that's very helpful is having academics who can point to specific research that has been done time and time again, and to create a indisputable portfolio of information about how arenas drain cities of money, or how arenas do not actually deliver on their profits, do not deliver good jobs, consistent jobs, well-paying jobs, or how arenas have gentrified communities all over the country, not just Chinatowns, but other Black and brown, low-income neighborhoods. And so we've been really targeting professors, trying to bring them together to write letters on or articles on the academic reasons. But Penn as an entity has not come out. I have personally talked to a couple administrators where they will, as individuals, share their support of Spock, but never in a public setting, not from the president, not from any type of upper administrators, because they don't want to touch it and they think that they don't have to. And so it is really disappointing to see. But at the same time, there are professors who will spend the extra, 5 hours a week to help us out, and, putting out that crucial information where it's like an academic, a researcher is saying that this arena will be bad for the city, bad for Chinatown, is something indisputable, something that the developers don't really have on their side, as we haven't really seen a credible impact study from them, credible and citable information that they put out. A lot of their stuff, they say that a study was done by who, what is this study? Is it published? Nothing like that, nothing credible. And so for us to have academics, architects on our side, does give us a lot of credibility.
Thank you. Thanks, Taran. And we have a lot of questions coming in, so I'm going to try to get as many of these in as possible. The next one I'm going to direct to Lisa because of your Tale of Three Chinatowns. This one is on DC's Chinatown. So the individual writes that with gentrification, DC's Chinatown has diminished considerably through the years. And a lot of the residents that lived in Chinatown have moved out to the suburbs in Maryland or Virginia. And so the question is, have people made the argument of, well, what about relocating Chinatown to another area where there's a dense population of AAPI? And have you seen that argument made in DC or beyond in the work that you've done?
Yeah, that's a good question. I'm not going to completely like answer it dead on, because I think that's a whole other sort of question. But the think places change. Okay. I mean, places do change. There's no question about that. I mean, I think that, change is constant for a person, a home, a family, whoever, a community. So that's undeniable. And I think that with DC's Chinatown, as well as other Chinatowns around the country, there has been a move to the suburb. Okay. Whether you look at San Gabriel Valley out in LA, the LA area, or if you look at the inner Richmond of San Francisco, which is another like heavily, Chinese American populated area, or as the person who wrote the question, references the DMV, yes, in Virginia, Northern Virginia, and also out in Montgomery County and Rockville, Maryland, there's a large Chinese population. Now, I mean, the argument could be made, and this maybe also touches on the gentleman from Texas, his question, I think when we talk about Chinatown, we're talking about the historical Chinatowns that are downtown, that are neighborhoods. They were communities that were created out of forced segregation, at the turn of the last, over 100 years ago. And these immigrants occupied the space, right? Now, naturally, some moved to the suburbs for different reasons. And yes, they have collected there as well. Now, one could argue that I don't know if I'd call it Chinatown, but they do look different. I mean, you look at Flushing, right? These other areas outside of the city center that are heavily populated by Chinese Americans, Asian Americans, where there are businesses and community has moved. Would I call them Chinatowns? Not maybe. I mean, not now. Not what we think about Chinatown, not what we think Chinatowns are. So yes, I would say that they're extensions of Chinatown. Perhaps we think of them as satellites, but I think to just, simply say like, oh, well, can't we just call them Chinatown? It's not that simple, is my answer. And I don't know if Debbie wants to weigh in.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's been posed to us as well. And I think Chinatown is not just a geographic space where there's a bunch of Chinese people. Chinatown, I think, to the three of us from Philly Chinatown, is relationships and history and memory that is place-based. So you can't pick up the history and move it. You can't pick up those relationships and move it. Your memory is tied to this particular formation of community. It just can't be relocated and recreated somewhere else. Interestingly enough, like memories and relationships, you can't buy that with money. And because you can't exchange capital for it, it is considered not valuable. And I think what Chinatowns who struggle to survive are trying to show is that these are things that not only should be valued, but should be reclaimed, not just in Chinatowns, but across the country and across the world, because it is these like kind of ties of mutual obligation and respect and you walk down Chinatown and someone's going to ask me about my kids, or I've got to ask someone about their shoulder surgery, and you check up on each other and you know each other and you know each other's kids. And, sometimes it's a pain in the neck to everybody's all up in your business. But on the other hand, like this sense of community, that is one thing that I have not seen replicated in the exurbs. I don't think that it can be replicated. The other thing that I think is really important, at least in Philly Chinatown, is that we are still largely made up of first generation immigrants. It's like a landing point, and then when people are on their feet and their kids grow up here and know English, then they move. But who comes into Chinatown after that are new immigrants. So there's a bunch of old families, old timers, and then there's new immigrants. And that is survival, literal survival. Like, how do if I'm having a health issue, how do I see someone that speaks my language? Right? If I walk outside this community and speak my language, do I have to worry about being assaulted because I'm speaking a language that isn't English? I don't have to worry about that in Chinatown. So I think there's something about Chinatown that has always served this one particular role for our community, and it's a very long thread of history. And you know, a lot of our folks are low-income working class. They don't have the privilege to be able to just say, hey, I think I'm going to move, you know, and I can pick this place. Like that is not what our Chinatown is made up of. I mean, personally, could I do that? Yeah. But many, if not most of our residents wouldn't be able to do something like that.
Yeah, that is something that we tried to get across in the film with all three of the cities, is that it is a community. Yes, as a tourist, you might see it as a location where you can go get food, dim sum, hot pot, all that. But for the residents who live there and those who come through, I mean, this is actually your neighborhood, just like I have my neighborhood and my community that I've created here where I live. That is what Chinatown is to many. It is a neighborhood. It's a community of people.
Absolutely. And I think we have time for a couple more questions. So one is from an audience member, and it's about how political voice is truly essential. And Debbie, when you started, you'd mentioned the organizing that you've done when past developments have been proposed and how successful you've been. So this question is related, has getting members of the APIA community to vote on local and state issues difficult, or what would you attribute your success to in past efforts? So let's start with Debbie first.
I'd like to say I think we've been successful in spite of politicians, not because of them. We've been successful because we can rally public and build a case that makes public support for our community kind of impossible for politicians to ignore. Philly is an old machine town. Like it's democratic, but it's a democratic machine. Largely, someone I saw in the Q&A mentioned the trade unions. Yeah, the trade unions here, most of them do not live in Philadelphia, but they are very politically powerful. They donate a lot of money to campaigns. They obviously want this. They think it's jobs for the trades. Our argument is you'll have the same jobs no matter where the thing is built. But we are definitely at a political disadvantage. There are a couple of candidates for city council, one likely to get reelected, one we're crossing our fingers for. They're the only city council candidates in the entire city who've said they will oppose this project. That's how afraid people are of the trade unions. And and the Republican guy running for mayor also has said he opposes it. However, like Philly's 90% Democratic, so he doesn't really have a chance of getting elected. Ironically, one of the lead organizations besides Asian Americans United in this fight is AAPI-PA, which is a civil rights organization that focuses on electoral work and on getting people like voter registration, but also they do electoral work to get people elected who support the concerns that come from our community. And they've been working it hard. So we are trying, but I think at least I can say for Philadelphia, we win in spite of the politics. We overpower the politics. And I was hoping this would not be the case. And if Taran's mom had been elected, this wouldn't be the case. But right now we're back in that position, and it's a familiar one. So we know it's a tough fight, but we still think we can win.
Thank you, Debbie. And I want to spend the next minute with our panelists talking about what our audience members can do and where they can find more information. So why don't we start with Taran and Kaya?
Yeah, so you can, I don't know what the best way to do this, but we really spread a lot of information over social media. Yes, right up there. Spock's Instagram is private right now for some safety reasons that we ran into, but we will hopefully try to like get people accepted into that soon. Yeah, and I think one thing I think that I, as a student, really encourage people to do is just to talk to people, just to talk to people in your life about what you learned today, about what's going on. I think it's really easy for these developments to get built if people don't know what's happening. And so just even if you can talk to your friends and family and tell them, hey, this is what's going on in Philly, it's really helpful, especially to have people all across the country know what's going on. Also, we have a GoFundMe up right now. We are raising money to fund an independent impact study, environmental and traffic and parking study, I believe. The city agreed to fund these studies. However, the company that they chose has well, I think Debbie can elaborate on this more, but basically we didn't really get a say in choosing the company who did this impact study, even though that was part of the agreement when we were talking to city government. So I think we need about $50,000 for this independent impact study. I can send the link in the chat. I don't know if the chat is public or yeah, but Debbie, do you want to elaborate on that while I find it?
Yeah, the impact studies, we actually had a lot of professors from Penn and other professional urban planners, architects come up with a request for proposals for an impact study. We requested an impact study to see what the impact of this development would be on Chinatown. We developed an RFP that would look at the scope of things that we needed to know for Chinatown. We submitted it to the city, to our council person, to the planning commission, and to the mayor. And 3 months later, the mayor crows, yeah, we're going to do impact studies. And we're like, wow, they never even talked to us. Cool. We get the RFPs that they put out, and none of it is related to the things that we need studied for our community. The economic impact study kind of just talks about, is it one arena or two arenas? And nothing about the impacts on Chinatown. In fact, the traffic and parking studies, which is what we know will kill Chinatown, they aren't even pretending to do independent studies. They are using the study that the developers already had done for themselves. So it's not independent, and all the other impact studies are being paid for by the developers. The one doing the economic impact study is CSL. They are known for doing arenas across the country that want to justify their existence, hire CSL. And CSL always publishes economic impact studies that way overblow the actual benefit, cost benefit of arenas. This is well documented. You can go on Neil DeMouse's, he's a person that really focuses on arena and stadium development. He has a website called Field of Schemes, and look for CSL and you'll see how he's written about them over and over again. So that's why we know we need our own economic impact study. If we had the resources, we'd do a traffic study as well. But we're focusing on economic because we need to know what's going to happen to all our small businesses, because they're the lifeblood of the community. And if once they go, then the rest of the community will go.
Thank you, Debbie, and thanks for putting the information in the chat box, Taran and Kaya. And next, Lisa, how can people learn more or get in touch with you to learn more?
Yeah, my film has a website, 3chinatowns.com. You can view it on PBS Passport if you contribute to PBS. And I would say that how do you get involved? Go local, whatever is around you, try to get involved with your local AAPI community, and see where you can help. I mean, everyone brings skills and talents to the table, and you'd be surprised. I mean, everyone needs help, so you'd be surprised, what kind of help you can provide, if not, through donations, time and skills. And so that's my recommendation. There's so much work that needs to be done. I mean, the big message that we wanted to get across with our film was activism, activism, activism. The squeaky wheel does get the grease. And I would say that Chicago's Chinatown, and their development over the last 100 years is a really great example of how just the forces can come together in different ways. Boston is fighting for its life right now, as is Philly, as is New York, as is San Francisco. And I would say just getting involved, your mouth work can get you so far, right? Oh, I want to help, meeting, blah, blah, blah. But really actually doing the work, that's really where your efforts come in.
Thank you so much, Lisa. And for myself, earlier I had referenced some work incredible work that was done by the Harrison Institute for Public Law, led by Professor Lee. They interviewed stakeholders from across Chinatowns, more than 40 of them in the US. So if you're interested, I think you could get in touch with me and I'll put you in touch with them. But otherwise, I want to thank the audience for all of your comments, your interest, and your questions. I apologize, we were not able to get to all of them. And so please, if you have the time, for the audience and our panelists to take a look at those questions and comments. And then you have the emails on the screen, or it was just on the screen. So I believe you can get in touch with each of the panelists to further the conversation. So with that, thank you again to our amazing panelists, Debbie Wei, Taran Flaherty, Ellen, Lisa Mao, and Kaya Chow. And of course, Ellen, thank you for organizing this. So I'd like to pass it to you.
Hi, again, thank you to all the panelists, and especially Yilin for moderating. Thank you for everyone who attended. And if you have the time and money, please think about donating to support this cause. I sent several links in the chat that should have gone to everyone, and there will be like Yilin said, there's contact information on the screen. So again, thank you.